What is up, you guys? Teller checking in for some tough 31 talk here. I don't know about you guys. I'm assuming you are since you tuned into this video. But I am a big fan of The Ultimate Fighter. I have been from the very beginning days of it. Now, there's no question that the series has lost a little bit of its zest over the past years. You got shows like Dana White's Contender Series now that's really bringing in a lot of the young talent into the UFC. Whereas back in the day, of course, The Ultimate Fighter was really the main way that a lot of that young talent came into the octagon. But I still am a big fan of the show. And it's great that we have a season like Tough 31 taking place where you have two giant coaches, of course, no one bigger than Conor McGregor, Michael Chandler. What a star he is as well. And then I love the format of this show. I love the way that you have the veterans versus the young and up-and-coming fighters. And I like the way that it also played out with McGregor getting both the young and up-and-comers of the bantamweight division and the lightweight division. And then you got Chandler with the veterans in both those divisions. So I really like the way this season is starting to kick off. This video here, we are going to basically just brush upon all the fighters on the show. And we won't take too long as we talk about each of these fighters, but we'll briefly brush upon who these fighters are that are going to be participating on the show, and who we will be watching fight on a weekly basis. And before we talk about the first fighter, if you are a fan of this type of content, you're going to want to hit that subscribe button because, like I said, I'm going to be having tons of Tough 31 content coming your way, as well as a weekly recap of every episode. So you guys will see the recap of episode 1 being uploaded here to the channel very briefly as well.
Welcome to the show. This is the MMA fortune teller. Yeah.
The MMA fortune teller.
The teller.
So the first fighter that I want to talk about is in the lightweight bracket. He's an SBG product, and fortunately enough for him, he's going to be working with his own coach and his own team there as he's going to be on Team McGregor, and that's Lee Hammond. Now, if you guys remember, there was some controversy of Conor McGregor giving a couple guys a boot that were initially supposed to be on the show. They put in a lot of work in preparation to be on the show. Then in comes Conor McGregor swapping a couple of those guys out for his own hometown boys, and Lee Hammond was one of those fighters. He's a fighter that is known for being around Conor McGregor and John Kavanagh and them from a very early age. He's 5-0. He's undefeated. Not a lot of professional experience, but you have to understand this is a kid at 27 years old that has almost 20 amateur fights under his belt. So this is a fighter that understands the sport. I don't think he's as green as some of you guys think. He's decently well-rounded. He has shown that he has a good ground game. His striking's okay. We've seen him flatten a couple of guys out and use his ground and pound, using his jiu-jitsu to hold him down and get a couple of stoppages. One thing I noticed is that his pro resume, it is against some very low-level talent. He does have a victory over in Bellator, but again, 4 of his 5 victories were against low-level talent, and I think he still has a lot more to prove. And, I'll say this. In his first match, he's taking on Kurt Holobaugh, former UFC fighter, a very tough fighter. No spoilers here because at the end of the day, I don't know what actually took place in the show. I'll cut it straight with you guys right now. We understand that all this already has taken place. There's little ways you can kind of get hints in a variety of ways of what took place. But you know that these fighters are not leaking that information, at least not far enough for me to know. But there's little things, little information that comes my way, or little commercials you see for the show where you see guys getting hit with some big shots, or they look like they're on their way to getting knocked out. I don't know this to be true, but I have a feeling that Kurt Holobaugh takes out Lee Hammond in that first fight. We'll see if that comes to fruition. We'll see if that actually is accurate. But Lee Hammond, a promising fighter, at the very end of the day, this experience is going to be amazing for him. He's only 27 years old, going out to Vegas, training out there like this, and being in this type of environment. It's going to make him become a very much more well-rounded fighter, and I think he'll grow from this experience. Not sure if he gets past that first fight. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe he pushes towards the top. We'll see how far he can push it. The next fighter I want to talk about, we're staying in the lightweight division. We're staying over on Team McGregor. I'll make this one quick because we already seen him get starched within 10 seconds by Roosevelt Roberts. Nate Jennerman, a fighter that actually had a decent amount of experience coming into the show, even though he's one of the young and up-and-coming fighters. He's a tough dude, and, it was a very disappointing performance for him. My heart really went out to him there watching the show. I mean, he seems like a great dude, and I could just only imagine how he was feeling after getting starts within 10 seconds, not even being able to show any of his ability, when really his true skill set is when the fight starts to get going. He has good cardio, good grappling, a little sloppy at times, but still, I mean, he would have thrived a lot more in a grappling type of fight against Roosevelt Roberts late on in that fight, rather than just standing and boxing it out with Roosevelt. So Nate Jennerman loses on the first episode of the show. We're going to be doing a recap of that episode here in a minute, but I mean, how this show takes place. There's opportunities for these fighters. Sometimes guys aren't able to, continue as they win, maybe due to injuries or other types of things like that. So Nate Jennerman needs to continue to work on his craft, stay ready, might get an opportunity to fight on the Ultimate Fighter finale or something like that. So, we'll see what's next for Nate Jennerman, but I do believe he will have another opportunity in one way or another. So he better be staying diligent and learning over there, as he prepares for what's next in his pro career. The next fighter we're going to be talking about is the 34-year-old Aaron McKenzie. So one of these young, hungry fighters that's trying to work their way into the UFC, but he's 34 years old, has a decent amount of experience. He is 11-2-1 as a pro, and he's been recently battling over on the LFA scene, and he's been having some good success. This guy is extremely tough. His bread and butter really is making things ugly in there, using his grappling. I think he's a better grappler more so than a polished striker, but is also willing to participate in a war on the feet. Doesn't wear damage that well, man. He definitely gets opened up in there. And, I do believe that he is the type of fighter that can fare well against certain fighters that are lacking in the grappling department. But he's going to be facing off against the veterans, and a lot of those veterans there, they're well-rounded. They have good takedown defense, and I think that he could run into some trouble on the show if he's not really able to go to his strength here. So we'll see how that plays out for him. But I do think that he's a tough fighter, and I think he has some potential. Victories over a former Ultimate Fighter contestant, Joe Giannetti. Shout out to Joe Giannetti. We've had an interview with him on the show. He went to a split decision over in Bellator, Chris Gonzalez. Chris Gonzalez, a very talented fighter. So even though he lost that fight, a little bit of a feather in his cap there. And since that loss, he's on a 4-fight winning streak, even taking out Brandon Phillips. Some of you guys may be familiar with him, and that was over at LFA 104. So we'll see how far he can push it. But I do believe he can run into some trouble on the feet if he's not able to really get his fights down to the mat and mix things up. A little somewhat one-dimensional, and I could see him being bloodied up in there. And I think he may have been one of those fighters that, as you see some of those commercials for, you see all that blood and whatnot. He may have been one of the guys that was bloodied up there. So we'll see how far Aaron McKenzie can push it on the show. So wrapping up the lightweight division, as far as Team McGregor goes, we're going to be talking about a young and somewhat promising fighter, a very solid striker in Landon Kinoes. This is a fighter that has put in some work with Team Killcliff FC, formerly known as Sanford MMA. You guys know I'm very high on that camp over there, and Henry Hooft and all that. And it's no wonder that his striking has looked very good. He is a fighter that really needs to continue to work on his overall craft. There's no question about that. I want to see him really round out his skills. But I do like his striking. I think he's a very dangerous striker, and I think there's potential for him to have some of the bigger finishes on the feet during this show here. We take a look at his resume. He is 7-1-1 with that draw there. The draw actually taking place over in Bellator, as well as his lone loss. And it's also worth noting that draw was in his pro debut. The loss that he had was a split decision loss, and it was against a respectable fighter. If you take a look at the opponent there, who was named by Naimov, was a Tajikistan fighter and has a decent little resume there. So going to that split decision loss there, not necessarily the worst blemish. And since then, he is on a 5-fight winning streak, finishing 4 of his last 5 fights. In his last 2 fights, I think that those kind of stood out a little bit more than some of the others. Getting knockouts in the second and third rounds over there at Titan FC. against fighters that have they had somewhat of respectable resumes. Both fighters were actually 9-3. If you compare those fighters' resumes compared to some of the earlier fighters, not as respectable resume. So you can't really judge those victories as much as the last two. So we'll see how far he can push it on the show. I do believe he's one of the more refined strikers, and I'm excited to see what he does on the show. All right, so we'll stay on Team McGregor, and we'll roll through the bantamweights. I wanted to talk about all the newer faces a little bit more so than going into the veterans. And I want to start off, I think it's Mando that we kick it off by talking about Mando Gutierrez, who some of you guys are familiar with, right? Mando Gutierrez fought on Dana White's Contender Series in a fight that was a little bit more of a known fight based on the fact that he was taking on Raul Rosas Jr., who was, one of the youngest fighters that we've ever seen. I think, in fact, he was the youngest fighter we've ever seen fight under the UFC banner when that fight took place. So everybody was watching that. And Mando came up short. I mean, there's no question about it. He lost to Raul Rosas Jr. And as high as I was even at the time on Raul Rosas Jr., I was a little surprised that he didn't have more success and didn't get the nod there, if I'm being honest. Mando Gutierrez is a fighter that's decently well-rounded. I've liked what I've seen from him down on the mat. He has a nasty guillotine. We've seen him pull off a bunch of rear naked chokes, so he's really good at those power type of submissions. And I think his striking's coming around as well. We saw him in his last fight. He got a first-round knockout over Tim Escatruth. That's a guy that is really an honest person, so that holds a lot of weight there. And on a serious note, though, Mando Gutierrez is one of the favorites to win this bracket. I believe he is ranked the number 1 seed in the bantamweight division there in Team McGregor. So we'll see how he fares against some of the veterans. But let's cut to the chase here. In my opinion, the veterans in the bantamweight division, there's some talented dudes, and I think that he may have some trouble if he's able to even push towards the top and face off with some of the bigger names there. But you guys know there's some dangerous dudes on the veteran side of things. We'll be talking about those guys in a second. But Mando Gutierrez, I'm excited to learn more about him on the show too, right? He's a dude that says he didn't really come from much. Seems like a real tough type of dude, and I'm excited to see how far he can push it. Another fighter on Team McGregor in the bantamweight division, a former Dana White's Contender Series competitor. We got Rico De Santis, a fighter that has put in an extensive amount of time over at Cage Titans, fighting over there in the Northeast. He's also fought in Bellator a couple times. We mentioned that fight that he had on Dana White's Contender Series. That was a big fight for him at the time. That was one of the earlier seasons of the show. That was back in 2018. That might have been the first season, actually. And he got finished there by Montel Jackson in the 3rd round. We know that Montel Jackson is a very serious opponent there. He really has not been active since that fight. So since 2018, he has only fought 2 times. And one of them was against a complete scrub, a 1-14 type of fighter, 1-14 fighter. And then in his last fight, he did finish his opponent, who was a 7-3 opponent, Gareth De La Cruz, over at Combat FC. And that fight took place about a year ago as well. So he's been extremely inactive, and he's a fighter that definitely shows to be diverse. I mean, we've seen him pull off some wild submissions. He's pulled off a Peruvian necktie in the cage. He's scrappy. But I really don't know how much we can expect from him. He's a fighter that's going to have to kind of prove it to me. Just wasn't really completely sold, and everything that I've seen from him, he's tough. But again, the inactivity as well. So, I'm excited to learn more about him. Up next in the bantamweight division, also on Team McGregor, we got Carlos Vera, the Ecuadorian fighter, training out of 50-50 MMA, trained by, or at least has put in some time with Ryan Hall, former Ultimate Fighter contestant, a fighter that has some of the most dangerous jiu-jitsu in the game. You guys know he will literally rip your limbs off your body. Carlos Vera has some tricky submission skills as well. I believe he's pretty good off his back from what I've seen from him. On the feet, he's a little wild with the kicks, if you ask me. But his striking is okay, but kind of throws those kicks out there a little wildly. I think he will be vulnerable to be hit with some counters there at times. But this is a fighter that has a good amount of experience. He's now 12-3 as a pro, and I like the level of competition that he's been battling with over there at Fury FC. Definitely has some respectable opponents on his resume there. And even when you take a look at his losses as well, they're names that you guys may recognize. I mean, it's not like he's in there, completely inexperienced. I think that this is a fighter that will have some promise on the show. He's fought over in LFA as well as a victor in LFA. He's fought 4 times in Fury FC. And he's 35 years old. Another fighter that, although he's one of the new faces, he's not a young buck, to say the least. So this is a fighter that the time is now, without a doubt, for Carlos Vera. And I'm excited to see how far he can push it. 5'6", with a 69.5-inch reach there, and I think that he may have some success with his jiu-jitsu skills. I would like to see him maybe try to exploit some of his opponents' jiu-jitsu. I think that that's a little bit of his strength, and I wouldn't be surprised maybe if we see him pull off a sub on the show. Coming off 2 guillotine victories in a row. And then even when you look back early on his career, I mean, pulling off, an ankle lock, a rear naked choke early on. I mean, he's a threat to finish the fight against his opponents with the submissions, a handful of knockouts. But I don't know if I see him landing a knockout on the show. I think, again, let's see what he could do with his jiu-jitsu on the show. Then wrapping it up, as far as the new faces go, the last bantamweight fighter on Team McGregor, Trevor Wells, fighter that, to be honest, I really wasn't too familiar with before seeing the cast here announced. Trevor Wells, a Team Quest fighter. He is 8-3 as a pro. I like the fact that he's only 27 years old. I more so like some of these guys being younger. Therefore, maybe they learn from this experience and there's time for them to develop. Whereas some of these other fighters we talked about, 35 years old. I mean, if they don't do good on the show, it's pretty much over. Trevor Wells, this is a fighter that was fun to break down tape on. He's a fighter that is more than willing to exchange in a brawl. Has some decent power in his hands. Seems to be pretty strong in the clinch, and with his wrestling, he could also kind of nullify and hold his opponents up against the cage. But I mean, he's willing to trade with you as well. Good takedown defense, throws heavy leg kicks, and he's a little bit of a headhunter. Definitely needs to polish up his overall striking. But I'm excited to see how far he can push it on the show, and it'll be cool to get to know him as well. Coming off a split decision victory over David Duran over at Uriah Faber's combat. Before that, had a first round knockout over Henrich Wassemer. Not the most familiar names here. You take a look at his 3 losses. He had a loss to Carlos Hernandez. Some of you guys are familiar with him. He fought on Dana White's Contender Series, and that fight took place at LFA 93. So he's been somewhat on the stage before. And I have a feeling that he'll be a fighter that participates in some of the more fun fights on the show. All right, now for Team Chandler, a lot of you guys are familiar with these fighters already. So I'll kind of just cruise through all these fighters here at once. We'll start off with Timur Valiev. This is my favorite to win the bantamweight bracket. I think that Timur Valiev is a fighter that should be on the UFC roster already, even going in to this season. I mean, he's a fighter that has definitely shown to be a well-rounded fighter, pushes the pace upon his opponents. In the UFC, he was 2-1. Victories over Raoni Barcelos and Martin Day. He had that loss against Jack Shore. And also, I should mention he's really 2-2 in the UFC because he had a no contest against Trevin Jones, and that was due to a marijuana failed test by Trevin Jones. That was a fight that he was dominating, but continued to try to push the pace late in that fight when he really could have just cruised into the victory and then ended up getting finished there at the end of the second round. So really 2-2 in the UFC, but I think that he just had a little bit of bad luck there. Jack Shore is a talented opponent as well. He was a little bit more naturally bigger in there, but I think that Timur Valiev can push the pace upon a lot of these guys and use his grappling and just the volume that he puts on the feet. I think that he's just a very good fighter. Obviously being a Dagestani guy, he has that grappling. He's 33 years old. He's very mature. He's 18-3, and he is my favorite to win that bracket. We could talk about Brad Katona as well. Brad Katona, another fighter that has. Not another fighter, but a fighter that has fought on The Ultimate Fighter, right? Brad Katona, he won the show back in the day, and he's a fighter at the time. He was undefeated. He's now 12-2. Losses to Hunter Azure, who's also on the show, and a loss to Merab Davalishvili, who is possibly the best bantamweight fighter in the world right now. So no real shame there. After taking those 2 losses, if you want to mention the Azure loss, that was a disappointing one for him. We'll talk about Azure next, but since that loss there, 4 victories in a row. 1 finish there, got the guillotine choke there. But other than that, a bunch of decisions there against respectable opponents, though. Maybe you don't know all these guys' names, but they're fighters that have decent resumes, coming off a victory over Gazimat Magomedov. And he's a fighter that definitely could push to make a run in this thing as well. But we talked about that loss that he took against Hunter Azure, who is also on the show here, a former UFC fighter. Hunter Azure, obviously a big victory on his resume is over Brad Katona. But other than that, victories over Cole Smith. He had a victory on Dana White's Contender Series against Chris Ocon. That's how he got into the UFC. Probably the more disappointing performance by him was getting knocked out by, old big head Brian Kelleher. That wasn't a good look for him there. He was going into that fight with some real steam. He has that wrestling pedigree. I believe he wrestled in Arizona, and I believe he's of Native American descent, or at least has some Native American descent as well, and seems to be a cool dude. And after losing a split decision loss to Jack Shore, which really isn't the worst look. Jack Shore, a very talented fighter. He did get submitted by Keith Richardson over at Icon FC 2, and then bounced back with the victory over Ben Hollier there. So he's had a little bit of an up and down type of career. Possesses some power in his hands. He has some decent striking, some heavy leg kicks. Has the wrestling pedigree, of course. And we'll see how he holds up in the bantamweight division. Cody Gibson, another former UFC fighter. Cody Gibson, actually he fought in the UFC quite a while ago. If you guys remember him, and the Renegade Cody Gibson, he's 19-8, and since the loss that he had in the UFC, which it dates all the way back. He had a little bit of a run in the UFC, right? So he was 1-3 in the UFC, losses to Aljamain Sterling, Manny Gumbarian, and Douglas Silva de Andrade, who's still getting victories in the octagon. Had 1 victory over Johnny Bedford, and then they parted ways. And since they parted ways, really not a bad resume there. I mean, he's a fighter that has went 7-2 since leaving the UFC. His losses were against Adrian Diaz and Ray Borg. The Ray Borg fight coming over in Eagle FC, Khabib's little thing he has there. After that loss, he had a victory over Francisco Rivera. Got the submission in the 3rd round. Victory over John Dodson at XMMA. So he's still been on the scene, right? I mean, for those of you guys that are big fans of the sport and you guys watch some of these other little promotions they got going on, I mean, he's a guy that has been around the way still. So a well-rounded fighter. He can grapple, he can strike, he could do a little bit of it all, but the wrestling is his foundation. He's 35, and he's a guy that you might want to keep an eye on. This is a guy that's he's capable, so we'll see how he does in the show. We talked about all the bantamweights now, so we'll go over to the lightweights, and these guys are definitely well known. Some of these guys have been fighting in the UFC as of very, very recently. Roosevelt Roberts, he's a fighter that I was very high on. As he came off Dana White's Contender Series. I really liked his striking, and you guys already saw he already had a big knockout on the show, showing the boxing skills that he possesses. I met him actually after the weigh-in of an event way back in the day, and he was a very cool dude. There was nobody outside the arena. I ran up on him, and he was nice enough to take a picture with me, as you see there. 12-3 as a pro. He talked about the fact that he wasn't really taking his career as serious as he should have, was just kind of going out there to get a paycheck. And I think we kind of saw that in his career, as he was just recently knocked out by Kevin Kroom. That turned into a no contest due to marijuana, but be clear, he was knocked out. It was a standing guillotine choke, but I say knocked out because he was clipped with a big shot. He was wobbled, and that was the only reason why he was caught in that submission. I mean, he got hit hard on the feet, and he has to continue to work on his striking defense there. He also got hit with a wheel kick where he was put completely unconscious by Ignacio Bahamendez. A loss to Jim Miller, got caught in an armbar there. You take a look at some of his victories. Brock Weaver, a fighter that was really never on the level, a very low-level victory there. The Thomas Gifford fight, I saw that live. In fact, that was the fight that he was going into the weigh-ins where I met him there. Thomas Gifford, not on the level, should have never been fighting in the UFC. Maybe the biggest victory of his career was against Alexander Yokolev, a tough Russian. And then since that wheel kick loss against Ignacio Bahamondes, 2 victories in a row. So, just getting back in the mix of things against fighters that had interesting resumes, right? 20-11 and 20-10, fighting over at Eagle FC, took out Alexandre de Almeida in that last fight. And I think Roosevelt Roberts is a fighter that's very live to go far in this lightweight bracket. His striking is dangerous. And if you see how he's towering over me in the picture, I'm telling you guys, it says he's 6'2", but he's creeping up on 6'3". I'm 5'11 and a half. I'm just under 6 foot. On Tinder and all that, I'm 6 foot, but maybe I'm more 11 and a half if you want to be honest. But look how much bigger he looks compared to me there. I mean, he is a tall and lanky fighter, and he's not just frail with his skills. I mean, this is a guy that throws some real pop into his shots. He's crisp. He knows how to use that length. He throws very straight punches, and I think he's a real threat on this show. I want to go over to Jason Knight real quick. Jason Knight, a fighter that was really kind of somewhat of a name in the game back in the day, if you guys remember. I mean, he always brought the fight. This is a fighter that, listen, I'm not saying he's near on the level of those types of guys like the Justin Gaethjes, the Michael Chandlers, the Dustin Poiriers. He's like a bootleg version of that. He's like a 99-cent store of that because he's willing to engage. He brings the fight. He's a fun fighter to watch. His skill set is not necessarily there, but, I am a fan of his to an extent. I like what he brings to the table. Some big victories he had in the UFC. Check this out, man. Victories over Dan Hooker, Jim Ehlers, a fighter that had a lot of success over in BKFC after. Bruce Leroy, Alex Caceres, Chaz Skelly, finished Chaz Skelly in the 3rd round. And then he ran into a little bit of a tough section there. He lost to Ricardo Lamas, Gabriel Benitez, Makwan Americani, and Jordan Rinaldi. Not really the best of names. Lost to Artem Lobov in that BKFC fight where he was all bloodied up. I mean, that was one of the most damage I've ever seen a fighter take. That was a war. What a great fight that was. And then he actually won in the rematch against the GOAT, Artem Lobov, where he stopped Artem Lobov in the 5th round due to cuts. Recently had another bare knuckle fight against Charles Bennett, an MMA bare knuckle fight, right? Over under Gamebred fighting, the fighting banner. That was in the first event. He, No surprise there, submitted Charles Bennett. Charles Bennett, all he does is go out there and get a paycheck because of his name and lose. Lost to Bobby Moffett, who's a tough fighter, and then just bounced back with the victory over Ray Trujillo. So I'm excited for Jason Knight. There's no question about that. I am excited to see how far he can push it. And we got 2 more fighters to talk about. Austin Hubert, I'll make it quick. Austin Hubert, a fighter that definitely shows to have good cardio, throws nice leg kicks. I think that his real claim to fame was when he went in there against this big top prospect who was coming in with all these grappling credentials, and Max Grosskopf, and was able to make Max not get up off the stool going into the 2nd round. That was a big victory for him. He was an underdog there. Was submitted against Joe Selecki in that next fight, then went out there, took a victory over Dakota Bush, then lost to Vince Pichel. A lot of win-loss going on. Had a loss against Davi Ramos in his UFC debut. Davi Ramos, very talented jiu-jitsu guy there. But in his last 2 fights, a victory over Julian Lane, take that for what it is, and then a victory against Kagan Agnew and caged aggression. But just understand that Hubert has really good cardio. He's confident in his striking. He's very patient with his striking. He sits down on his shots. He's very cerebral out there. He's well-rounded. He's 31 years old. He's in the prime of his career, fighting over with Team Elevation coming into this, former LFA champion. I think that Austin Hubert is, without a doubt, a fighter that is very dangerous on the show here and could really give the lightweight bracket a run for their money. And then you got Kurt Halaba, who is a fighter that I really think has some potential to push towards the top here. He's 36 years old, and that's fine. And he's still in phenomenal shape. I think that he's going to come in with a world of experience. He's really had a tough run in the UFC. He went 0-4 in the UFC, but fighting some high-level competition. Losses to Thiago Moises, Ione Barcelos, Shane Burgos, and we're talking about when those fighters were really in their primes there. Recently, had victories over at XFC against Jose Luis Verdugo, Josor Boyi. And it's also worth noting he had victories in Titan FC before going into the UFC over JZ Cavalcante, Jos Denis Cedeno. He had a rear naked choke in the 3rd round there. And he's just a battle-tested fighter. Had a victory over in Titan FC against Des Green back in the day. He's a fighter that has gone the distance against Steven Siler, Pat Healy back in the day. He's a well-rounded fighter, good grappling, pushes the pace. He's strong, good wrestling and all that. And I think that he could definitely give some guys some problems. He has good power in his hands, and capping off the last fighter there, that will be Kurt Holobaugh. You keep an eye on him in the lightweight bracket as well. So I'm digging this show, you guys. I'm really digging this show. You guys, give me some feedback. Let me know which fighters you're most excited to see perform on the show. I definitely want to see you guys hit in the comment section up below, because I'm actually genuinely interested in which fighters you guys think are going to take the show, and what your overall thoughts are on all this, right? Because I'm just a real fan of all this type of stuff. So I think that Timur Valiev is going to be my favorite to win the bantamweight bracket. I think that Brad Katona will be in the mix as well. Maybe we see some of the new faces shine, but I think the veterans will kind of be holding their own in the bantamweight division. In the lightweight division, interested to see if some of the new faces can do some work there. But maybe I'm being a little biased because I know I'm familiar with these guys a little bit more so, but I think Roosevelt Roberts, Kurt Holobaugh, Austin Hubert, those are going to be some of the guys that are going to be a big problem in the lightweight division. I think that those guys have potential to take this tournament. I do kind of favor those three guys there. And, maybe some of the new faces show up like Landon Kinoes, and we'll see about that. But I am, if I'm going to give you guys a pick for the lightweight, if I'm not going to cheat you guys there, I'm going to say, I don't know, man, Roosevelt Roberts looking pretty good there, but, we got to see him really perform in that first fight. So that's kind of a little bit cheap. I'm going to say Kurt Holobaugh takes the lightweight division. How about that? I'm going to say tough old Kurt Holobaugh can take this. It's tough, man. I almost want to go Austin Hubert as well. But one of those three, you guys know I'm high on all three of those. So hit the comment section up below. Hopefully this video kind of sheds some light on the fighters that we're watching during the show, and you get to know them a little bit more so now going into the next episode. And like I said, we will have a recap of every episode at least by Wednesday, the day after the episode takes place. So, all right, guys. Hit that like button if you guys haven't already. Subscribe if you want much more TUF 31 content coming your guys' way. I appreciate you guys. Catch me on all my social media. Check out all my content. Signing out. Teller.
Welcome to the show. This is the MMA fortune teller. Yeah.
The MMA fortune teller.
The teller.